Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for August 11th, 2025. Well, we're entering an historic week. We're still in the zone of turbulence between two systems. One, a system typified by endless war, exploitation, colonialism, but the other with the potential for positive change through achieving normalization of relations, especially based on the principle of mutual benefit. Now, the key point this week will be the Friday meeting scheduled for Alaska between Presidents Trump and Putin. And this offers the opportunity to do what Trump had promised back in 2016, before Russiagate, before the complete crazy launch of attacks on him and Putin, where he said we can have a change of security relations, which will take into consideration the most profound interests of both nations, not only both nations, but for the whole world. And that's what's crucial. There was a promising talk that prepared for this. There's been ongoing discussions, but last week, Trump's envoy, Witkoff, met with Putin for almost three and a half hours. And what they said is the discussion should include not just Ukraine, but the whole range of relations, including trade, development of resources, cooperation in developing the Arctic, as well as recognizing the importance of the global South. And for President Trump, that would be extremely useful for him to do. But rather than try to guess what is on the minds of the two leaders or what will happen, we're mobilizing support for a positive change. And it's necessary because there's tension between the nations still. There's still the ongoing situation in Ukraine. There's the unresolved situation around nuclear arms talks and so on. So one of the things that was initiated yesterday was a letter from Helga Zepp-LaRouche in her capacity as chairwoman of the Schiller Institute, calling for the discussion to include the Bering Strait Tunnel. And I'll get to that in a moment, but let me give you a sense of what Helga's been up to and the Schiller Institute. We've circulated a petition to Trump calling for a three-way meeting with Putin, Xi, and Trump. This was before the announcement of the two-way meeting, but now it's possible that Trump could continue on to Beijing, where on September 3rd, there's a commemoration of the 80th year anniversary of the end of World War II in Asia. And this would be an opportunity for three leaders of the most important, powerful nations in the world to get on the same page in moving into a new security and development architecture. And so that petition that we are circulating is getting signatures by many people from all over the world who want to see this change. And I'll have a link to that in the description section today for you to use with your networks and friends. Now, the other thing to look out for is the sabotage from Europe led by the United Kingdom. There was a meeting over the weekend with Starmer and Macron and several other leaders. And what they said is that the meeting should not take place without Zelensky and Ukraine at the table. Now, Vice President Vance said it would not be productive to have Ukraine now, especially since Zelensky will not accept the terms that were discussed between Witkoff and Putin, which are now to be finalized in the discussion between Trump and Putin. If you have Zelensky there with his crying fit, it just wouldn't work. And what Vance said is he can be included later. But in the meantime, the U.S. is prepared to withhold funds for Ukraine and arms for Ukraine to make sure that there can be not just a ceasefire, but a peace. Now, the European leaders are still intent on sabotaging this potential, and they put out a statement saying Russia is solely responsible for the fighting in Ukraine, which goes against the evidence of history that the trigger for this was the move of NATO eastward, going back to 1992, and the efforts of especially the British, but with the United States in full support and sometimes in the lead, to move to disrupt and destroy Russia as a way of assuring the U.S. would remain as the sole hegemon. So watch out for the European leaders. They're untrustworthy. They're also very unpopular, and they're having their countries fall apart. So the other intervention from Helga Zepp-LaRouche, which I mentioned, is a letter to Trump and Putin, which will be attached in the description section, calling for the construction of a tunnel under the Bering Strait to connect the United States and Russia. She's writing that the rail systems of Eurasia, the uniting of the rail systems of Eurasia with the Americas. This is one big step toward the world land bridge that Helga introduced in the early part of this century. In other words, go beyond the fighting and give the whole world a beautiful vision for the future. That's what's required now. Open up the resources of the resource-rich areas of Siberia and the Arctic. Have a commitment to a great infrastructure project which will change history, including cooperation with China. And that's why it's important that China be brought into the discussion on September 3rd, with the possibility of Trump going to Beijing. That's to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. Now, there are a couple of other things to watch of crucial importance. What's going on in Southwest Asia, as the whole world is now recognizing the genocide committed by the Israelis against the Palestinians and starting to take steps to stop it. Netanyahu intends to escalate, saying that Israel will take control completely of Gaza. The implications of this are ethnic cleansing. But there's a fight over this. In Germany, the German government voted to restrict arms and funding for Israel as long as there's not a ceasefire in Gaza. This is quite significant. Germany, I think, is the second or third largest funder of Israel. Now, there's also a report that I'll be presenting in the next couple of days of the danger of a takeover by Messianic Jews of Israel. That this is a long-term project associated with the yeshivas of Rabbi Kook. And this is the Greater Israel strategy, but of moving from Israel as a state to Israel as the most important land in the world. And this is part of a Armageddonist approach, which is not the same as the Christian Zionists who are supporting Israel, but is based on the idea of racial superiority of the Jews. And this is from the ultra-Orthodox. So I'll have a report on this later in the week. And then finally, we're watching the attacks going on against Tulsi Gabbard, whose work is absolutely crucial for exposing the activities of the deep state and for making those people who are acting to sabotage U.S.-Russian relations, make them accountable for what they've done. They're accountable for the whole war in Ukraine. Had they not moved against President Trump in 2017 with Russiagate, we could have had a peace agreement locked in as many as 8 years ago. And so don't be surprised to see attacks on Gabbard coming from typical sources such as the neocons in the House and Senate in the United States in both parties. The New York Times had a vicious attack on her on August 1st. Other media are accusing her of being a threat to national security. Why? By declassifying documents which show there was a dispute over whether Russia was involved in attacks on the U.S. elections, that there was a suppression directed by Obama through Brennan at the CIA and Clapper as the National Intelligence Director, that they suppressed the evidence that there was not agreement among the intelligence specialists that Russia was involved. Don't you think people should know that, and that the people who were involved in that should be held accountable? So these are some of the fights coming up. But we need you in the battle. So use the links in the description section to become part of the mobilization to make this week the starting point of a new era of sustainable peace based on mutual security and development.